What is up, medical device world? Mike and Hank here with a regular report of the news that you need to know for your upcoming day in medical device world. So, Hank, today we are talking about the latest in a long string of CMS crackdowns on many infection prevention related issues. You want to give us just a quick rundown of some of the most egregious?
Obviously, these are things that you never want to see in the news about your facility. But for those of us on the inside, nothing that I'm going to say about this report is stuff that most of us have not seen. These are really our challenges. A lot of Google searching to find hospitals all over the country all the time. As you said, CMS is not messing around. They're coming and they're looking for the same things every time. And many times they're finding the same downs every time. Yeah. So the first one that really stuck out to me was an interview that at the CMS surveyor did with the staff. And they asked about how the staff member was disinfecting their transvaginal transducers. Mm-hmm. And the staff member stated, quote, "I just run them under tap water and wipe them off with a paper towel."
What's wrong with that? That's right. Sarcasm, by the way.
So, the surveyor obviously wanted to follow up and said, well, are you aware of the manufacturer's recommendations for how to disinfect these transducers or the policy that's in place at your facility? And of course, the staff member was not aware and said she had not been trained in the proper disinfection.
Boy, if you wanted to get back to a root cause analysis, that probably hits the nail on the head. Has not been trained. And what's crazy to me is that for those of us who've been in the industry for a while, we almost get sick of hearing people say, follow the manufacturer's IFUs.
That's what I was thinking.
Hear it over and over and over again. Yet, what do we find in this exact situation? We find somebody who's apparently never heard it.
Even with all of the certified technicians that we have in the industry who have been exposed to that redundancy of IFUs through the textbooks and through school training, for instance, there's many other technicians who have been doing the job for a long time, have not been certified, or newer technicians who have just not set for the exam yet. Even if you have gone through the exam, folks sometimes don't retain that information as well as they should. And they may not go to annual conferences or to regional seminars to hear the kinds of things that we hear that we're like, not another training on IFUs. Haven't we heard that a million times? But you're right. And you run across these facilities that are not connected inside their own silos, don't have good internal training programs. And then what happens? This happens.
Yeah, and even you spoke about isolation. In this particular instance, it doesn't surprise me that it had to do with the transvaginal probes because that tends to be an isolated area. We even talked about on the podcast with Keith Colby, this area that people just seem to forget about. I myself went through this. My very first Joint Commission survey, the surveyors came through our sterile processing department. Everything went great. We were celebrating, high fives, and all of a sudden I get this phone call from Radiology, and they say, "We need your help. Come down here." And it turns out that there was this thing that apparently I was supposed to be responsible for. I didn't even know it existed, and so all of a sudden we got to come up with these processes, to fix this thing because it's out of the department, it's out of the OR. You don't think about it because it's not even sterilized. So you think, oh, well, it's not even that high risk. But when you start really looking at it, it's like, man, what the risk is actually a lot worse than what you might think when you start talking about things like HPV, for example.
I know I'm going to make you blush here, Mike, but I'm going to go back to the first episode that we ever did on the Beyond Clean podcast with Mike Matthews.
Never heard of him.
And the kickoff was talking about collaborating with infection control as a sterile processing leader. And man, oh man, you just gave a great example. Oftentimes, even though the on-site expert for sterilization and disinfection is a sterile processing manager. They may not be connected to these other ancillary facilities. And infection control, as great as they are and as smart as they have got the entire scope of care in that entire facility to be overlooking with a lot of high priority projects. It's easy for them to miss things like what's going on in radiology. How are these things being stored in the ER, clamps or trays, etc. It's very, very important, like you said in your interview, to collaborate with infection control, share that knowledge, really become not just the sterile processing subject matter expert, but at the facility level, anything that is reprocessed and reused, sterile processing should have some say in it, even if they don't have to oversee it.
This is one of those areas that I always encourage, particularly managers or any subject matter expert within the facility. You assume that your little area is what you know, and but it has no impact on anything else, and you would be shocked at how hungry your infection preventionist probably is to have your input on areas like radiology or the ER, like you mentioned, Hank. You have something very valuable to, to contribute to that conversation. So, if for some reason your infection preventionist hasn't reached out to you, be brave enough to reach out to them. You have something to contribute to them, and they will thank you for it. I seriously doubt you're going to run into one who's going to say, "Yeah, that's cool. Shut up, go away." Like that's just not going to happen. So please reach out to them. And speaking of infection preventionists, that was another thing that was specifically listed as a contributing cause in the CMS reports, was that the infection preventionists were just simply spread too thin. There were so many processes and so many issues that they were responsible for with a very small staff, that it's not really surprising that a lot of things were beginning to slip through the cracks.
I can't remember the specifics on the report in terms of this topic, but I know in my own experience, I've been in some of these multidisciplinary meetings and committees on surgical site infections. And they'll spend an hour and a half talking about all these potential things that they need to be doing with the colon bundles and, pre-surgery antibiotics and everything else. And I'm sitting in the back thinking, all right, so even if you get all of that right, if you're not getting clean instruments, it's a waste of time, guys. But oftentimes, they're not looking over their back shoulder to say, hey, who's that random dude or lady in the back with that sterile processing badge on? What do they have to say about this process? But even as you said again, if we're making ourselves available to infection control as a resource to take some of this off their plate and raise the importance of everything that we're doing in sterile processing, we're really not only protecting the patient, but we're protecting the facility against things like this. Horrible CMS reports.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, actually, here's the actual quote: is that there were 6 infection preventionists for a hospital average patient census of 540. Now, you think about that, like you said, infection preventionists have to be in every single area of the hospital. And those 540 patients, imagine how many departments are represented there. That's just too much for anybody. So, what a valuable opportunity for a subject matter expert in sterile processing to be able to have partnered with one of those infection preventionists and say, let me help you. I can't do everything in your job, but there's one area that I know really well, and it applies. So let's go on some rounds together. Let's inspect some processes. And let me make some recommendations. Just a great opportunity. Another kind of trend that I noticed was a lot of ignoring of facility concerns.
Yeah, because you mentioned rounding, and there's infection control rounding, but again, one of the areas in sterile processing that I think really misses out are these facility roundings. And I know there's an army of sterile processing managers out there frustrated with their facilities and their maintenance department and their EVS because our departments are not kept up to the standard that we want them. So I feel sorry for these sterile processing leaders, knowing that, yes, they already saw the cracks in the flooring
Mhm.
that the CMS surveyor found. They knew they were there, and they've probably been complaining about it for 3 years, and nothing was done. And wouldn't you know, you get one citation in a CMS report, and it's fixed the next day.
Yep. Particularly in my mind, I think about Detroit Medical Center with that whole thing, which is actually still ongoing, by the way. Their issues have been going on for at least 9 years before it made it into the Detroit Free Press. But you better believe as soon as it made it into the Detroit Free Press, all of a sudden it's our top priority. It wasn't for 9 years before, but as soon as it is, now it's our top priority.
And it's interesting, again, because these reports are public.
Yeah.
That's why we're talking about it on this show right now, is because CMS will publish these reports. If it rises to this level, you would think hospital administrators around the country would want to read, what are these other folks getting cited for? How can we try to get ahead of the curve and fix it? Now, granted, if you're running an entire hospital, I know there's a lot of regulatory oversight. You've got a lot of T's to cross and I's to dot. However, if you've got a sterile processing manager raising their hand saying, I have a concern, our floors are cracking, our washers are not passing their daily quality tests, I have a concern, you should be listening to them, administrator, and supporting them, again, not just to pass your CMS survey. These are real infection control safety issues that you cannot afford in the name of patient safety to keep ignoring.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Moving on through our list of things that we wanted to address in this report, which, by the way, I believe the report was 260 pages long. So it's available, it's out there. It's not the most entertaining of reading, but it's extremely long, obviously. Just we're hitting the highlights. One thing that we found that was really interesting was under the category of immediate jeopardy to patient health, right? That's the highest risk setting, saying that something happening here could literally kill somebody. And you think of the many things that could possibly be, and under that category is failure to monitor the expiration date of your Rapicide test strips. It's an easy mistake to make, but that is an immediate threat to patient health.
Yeah. So not only these strips, but any kind of expiration date product that's in use in your facility, yes, you should be dating them, but you should really have a training program in place. And I know we talked about training earlier, but you should
Yep.
have a straight up competency for any new staff member coming in that they're trained not only how to do the expiration dating, but just like you said, Mike, why is this a serious patient safety issue if you don't track the date? This one's kind of easy. If your strips are expired and they're not properly measuring the dilution rate or the minimum effective concentration anymore, then
Mm-hmm.
you have problems on the back end of this process. But yes, this is something that's not rocket science again, but I tell you, I'm in facilities all over the country almost every week, and I can't tell you how many of these types of test strips I find no date on them.
Yep, absolutely. And then probably the one that made us, I don't want to say roll our eyes, but probably inherited the most scorn was one that there's just honestly no excuse for, and that's the temperature and humidity logs. It's not the obvious thing that you would think that they just simply weren't keeping them. Oh no, they were keeping them. They were out of range 24 out of 24 days that were tested. So that's right, 100% of the days that they had documentation for, it was always out of range and with no corrective action taken whatsoever.
I don't know what these forms look like, what these logs look like, but I encourage facilities always put your acceptable range on
Mm-hmm.
your log sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have that range on the log sheet and you're just copying down the number off of the thermometer, then and that technician may not know that it's out of range, and they
Yeah.
may continue to document for 24 days straight, and then CMS comes in and says, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
out of range, and it could have been solved simply by a better form. Again, I don't know what the situation is here, but yeah, it is almost beyond belief that you would go for nearly a month completely out of range, and at least facilities or someone would say, hey, I think we have a problem here, guys.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, it goes back to training because at 24 days straight of being out of range, it has to be that the person taking it, what they were trained to do was you copy the number down and put it on the form.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. No training on why does it matter. No training on what do you do if it's out of range. Who do you call? And so it goes back to that training. And this really gets back to one of my biggest gripes, just in general, with the way hospitals function. I went on vacation a couple months ago to San Diego. And one of the things my wife and I did was we toured the USS Midway, this historic aircraft carrier, and you got a chance to talk to various people who had served on these aircraft carriers. And while we were talking to someone who had experience being a captain of the ship, I asked the captain what he would think about another captain who only spent time in the control tower and never went down to his engine room. And he told me that that person would never be a captain in the U.S. Navy in the first place because the main thing that they really focus on is taking care of their people and making sure that they have what they need to do their jobs well. And so his primary concern is always the engine room and the galley. Those two things that are critical for the basic infrastructure of the function of the ship. And it's fascinating to me that when we talk about failures like this, where are the mistakes? It is almost always in the infrastructure, the stuff that is supposed to enable those all stars at the top that we all like to talk about, like your Dr. Coolies or your various surgeons who do amazing work. But what is the infrastructure in place to support them? Do we only look at the top or are we looking at that base?
To get the captain down into the engine room, and I know this has come up a couple times through the podcast, especially with Dr. Nickel, in his proactive willingness to go down into sterile processing as a pediatric surgeon himself and say, I want to see the process.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the challenges here. And I think even on the episode that we did with Sean Flynn, he talked about how he was getting administrators to come down and tour the facility, and also Dr. Jason Bingham as well, talking about the importance of those things. And if you're looking for excuses to get folks like that to come into your department, a great excuse, if you will, is anytime someone gets certified, try to get a hold of your hospital president, vice president, administrator, and say, hey, what would really make this person's day? Just got certified. They're super excited about now they're able to provide an even higher level of safety for our patients. It'd be great if you could just come down and say congratulations and use that as the opportunity to turn not only celebration into a true understanding of, and hey, by the way, you see those cracked floors? That's a big CMS no-no.
Yeah, no doubt. In fact, actually, as you're mentioning that list, another one that popped in my mind was Jenny Gibbs. We interviewed her talking about, being one of the first facilities in the United States to elevate their standard of care from just high-level disinfecting their flexible scopes to sterilizing them, and not just the urology scopes, but even the GI scopes. And one of our big questions for her was, how did you get your administrator to sign off on all of this going above and beyond, because it costs money? And she said that her administrators had each one spent time going through the department. They had even put on PPE and tried to clean flexible scopes themselves. And you just don't see that kind of commitment. But I'll tell you, where you do see that kind of commitment is typically where you see the greatest amount of support. Anything else you want to add, Hank?
I know we need to close this episode, but two other things really stuck out on this report. And one, they got dinged for processing external clinic trays incorrectly. And in this scenario, it was a dermatology clinic. And so the surveyor saw these trays from dermatology and was like, what's the process? And a staff member that they talked to said, well, they clean them in dermatology and then they send them to us for processing. And of course, the next question is, are they compliantly cleaning? What's the scenario there? And it turns out it was not a good situation. And actually, in the hospital's corrective action, they are now not processing any trays for dermatology. They probably went to single-use instruments there, which, again, we're huge fans of converting to single-use. But that was a big one. So, keep an eye on those clinic scenarios, guys. It's not okay to just say, once it hits our door, then we do everything right after that. These surveyors want to know from patient all the way through the process and back again, is it being done correctly? In this case, it wasn't. The other one that I think is very important to mention here is they got tagged for not consistently testing the quality of their washers, so those daily quality tests or verification tests. They stated, well, we tested occasionally, the logbook was incomplete, even though their policies say it correctly, and the IFUs, again, for the washer tests are very specific for how often and how to run those tests. It goes back again, we end up where we started in this conversation, Mike, is you have to know and follow the IFUs. It will get you 99% of the way there, plus that 1% of training, and then you shouldn't have any problem, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of different applications you can take from it, but I'll tell you one that is definitely there, like you said, is the IFUs. But another one that comes back to is the value of collaboration. Like you said, of collaborating with those infection preventionists to improve that standard of care. I mean, when we bring up these stories about these hospitals that get dinged, it's incredibly easy to sit here and point fingers and say, those bunch of boneheads, they don't know what they're doing. Look at them. They're all horrible. But that's entirely the wrong lesson to take from this. The right lesson is look at the mistakes that were made and how do we prevent them from happening in our facility, because I'm going to go out on a limb and guess at least a few of these are happening at your facility right now. Guaranteed. If they're not, you can feel free to shoot me an angry hate mail and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But more than likely,
Mike at beyondclean.net.
Yeah. Mike at beyondclean.net. Please feel free to send your hate mail there. That's fine. I delete most of it anyway. So the point is that there's a lot that can be learned from there. And if it's just enough about just to make us feel better about ourselves, then we're really just missing the point. Anything else you want to add, Hank?
We will add a link to the CMS report in the show notes for this episode, so you can go read all 260 pages all by yourself.
Yep, good luck with that. I read several of them myself and immediately needed to take a drink. Until then, though, I'm Mike, and that's Hank, and we're signing off for the night.